Okay, last but not least, I would like to talk a little bit about where we're going in Ontario with production of nuclear waste. So unless we stop producing it, we're going to continue having to deal with this issue forever. And let's stop producing it because we have a choice. So big picture, who here is aware, or what's the #1 most nuclearized jurisdiction on the planet? France. And what's the second most nuclearized jurisdiction on the planet? Ontario. In other words, we get about 60% of our electricity from nuclear power. There is 1 reactor in New Brunswick. There were 2 reactors in Quebec, and they've both been shut down. And there are 20 nuclear reactors in Ontario, of which 2 are shut down. So there are 6 working reactors in Pickering, 4 at Darlington. Those are both 30 and 50 kilometers just east of Toronto on Lake Ontario, and 8 working reactors on Lake Huron at the Bruce Station. What is the largest working nuclear station in the world? The Bruce. It's largest. Now, the good news is that all our reactors are getting old. I mean, you can look at that as a positive because we can shut them all down. And that's what, we have to do. And that's what we're working on. The Ontario Clean Air Alliance and many other groups, including all the speakers here, we're working to shut down our existing reactors for sure when they come to the end of their lives, which is in the coming decade. Pickering is scheduled, all 6 reactors, to shut down 2020. Darlington is supposed to shut down in this year and next. They've gotten an extension until 2020, and they intend to rebuild all 4 reactors, extending the lives for another 4 decades. And then the Bruce nuclear reactors, we've already rebuilt 2 of them, and now they're just negotiating contracts right now to rebuild all the 6 of the others, so extending the lives of them for another 4 decades. But we have a choice right now in this province because we don't have to rebuild those reactors. We don't have to lock us in. We can shut them down when they come to their end of their lives, come up with a good transition for jobs. I'd like to say in terms of the jobs issue, the coal stations, when Ontario shut down its 5 coal plants, the #1 reason to oppose the shutdown of our coal plants wasn't because we needed the electricity. We all knew it was an option, even though we got 1/4 of our electricity from coal. The #1 issue really was jobs. We had, a couple of thousand workers making a living, towns that were reliant on those jobs. And the major resistance came from the unions. And in the end, we shut down each of those 5 plants, one after the other. It took 17 years. There was a job transition that happened throughout that process. And in the end, there was no job dislocation. It happened slowly. The workers got moved into other parts of the OPG Corporation. A lot of them retired. And slowly, the plants just were shut down and there was no massive dislocation. And I proposed the same thing. Let's do the same thing with the nuclear stations. We'll shut them down one at a time. We'll still have to deal with decommissioning for decades and nuclear waste for millennia, for millions of years, in fact. We got lots of jobs into the future. And also, there is a dearth of nuclear engineers globally. So any nuclear workers that wanted to go anywhere in the world, they could find jobs elsewhere. So let's talk about that green jobs transition, and also in terms of jobs. The fact that we're about to rebuild 10 nuclear reactors, that is going to cost you and me, Ontario taxpayers and ratepayers, well over $100 billion. That is money and that's going to raise industrial electricity rates. That's going to raise yours and my electricity rates, taking money out of us. If we we're going to spend that money elsewhere, much lower cost to meet our electricity needs, that would lower industrial electricity rates, meaning they would have more stability and they would be able to create more jobs locally in their industries. And it would also create jobs in a renewable energy industry. So that's part of the jobs transition, moving into green energy. Now, in terms of alternatives specifically for the Darlington reactor, what we're proposing is replacing those 4 reactors with water power from Quebec and conservation. So the opportunities to import water power from Quebec, which Quebec is the 4th leading producer of water power in the world. They have so much access, they don't have a market for it. They're selling it at rock bottom prices. We are right next door to them. We should be importing that water power. So that's the first thing. Conservation to reduce demand. Again, conservation costs a fraction of what it will cost us to rebuild Darlington. Reduce the amount of demand that Darlington produces, in addition to importing water power. Now, we have made good progress with the water power imports. We say that Kathleen Wynne has indeed ended electricity separatism in Canada because she has negotiated a deal already to import water power from Quebec up to 500 megawatts during peak times. So an exchange between Quebec and Ontario. So that's already begun, and they are now negotiating a long-term contract. So, but they can make that deal this big or this big. So we're pushing them to make it this big and forego the Darlington rebuild. Likewise, for the Bruce nuclear station, we could choose to invest that money in developing a green revolution in Ontario. The problem is there was a lot of pushback when the provincial government implemented the Green Energy Act, especially in the rural communities. There was a lot of opposition. We need to build opposition to the nuclear plant rebuild so that the government is aware that it's not just rural people that are opposing wind turbines in their neighborhoods, but urban and rural people want green energy, conservation, water power, wind, solar, geothermal, more than we want to rebuild our nuclear stations. And just in terms of cost, I have this, the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, we're an environmental and economic think tank, and we put all our arguments come down to the economics. So we're analyzing how much electricity costs. And this is, government figures, there's nothing controversial here. Water power from Quebec, they're selling it, 90% of it on the spot market price is 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So just keep that number in mind. Energy efficiency is generally costs 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Quebec water power, if we were to negotiate a long-term deal, it would be a reasonable price, 6 cents a kilowatt hour, say for 20 years. The Darlington rebuild project, according to OPG, will cost 8.9 cents a kilowatt hour. We know every project has gone over budget on average by 2.5 times. They regularly lowball their costs initially, and it's always going to be much larger. So, but even if we used OPG's rates of 8.9 cents, the Bruce nuclear station, they claim it will be they claim around 8 something, but adding in the nuclear debt from the last couple of decades, it will be around 10.6 cents a kilowatt hour versus the Darlington rebuild, which is, if we multiplied their expenses by 2.5 times, it's more like 16 cents a kilowatt hour. So you can, and wind right now, Quebec just negotiated and purchased lots of wind at 7.7 cents a kilowatt hour. So even wind is now much lower cost. Solar is still a little bit more, but in many states it's already competitive with these pricings here. So the renewable energy revolution is happening. If we delay these large, massive contracts with Bruce and Darlington, with OPG, and with the Bruce private nuclear company, then the longer we delay those contracts, the quicker renewables come online, the more likely we are to negotiate with Quebec to import water power to replace them. So in that regard, I have a couple of campaign pieces of literature that I would like to send through the audience. Some of you will have seen these already, and if so, take one for your friend. So we're building opposition to these campaigns. We think it's a political decision. It really comes down to Kathleen Wynne's majority government right now that decides how our tax dollars are spent in terms of purchasing electricity. So this is our leaflet that we've been pushing for about a year for them to import water power. We've made huge success in that regard, but this leaflet specifically says to replace Darlington. So it's got a postcard in the center. Feel free to fill it out here and leave it on your chair. I'll mail it in for you. Take a couple of extra for your friends. You could just send those around the audience. And our more recent leaflet that we're doing door-to-door in Kathleen Wynne's riding, popping them in mailboxes, and if any of you can help me do that, I need volunteer support. And it's also got a postcard to Kathleen Wynne, and it's about the Bruce nuclear deal, saying we don't want to spend $100 billion supporting the nuclear industry in the Bruce region. We want that money to kickstart a renewable energy revolution instead. And again, it's got the postcard. Please leave them for me and I'll mail them in for you as well. And I also have a sign-up sheet for No Nukes News, which is every 2 weeks. It's a newsletter that goes out that lists all the energy-related or electricity-related renewables and nuclear news. If you're interested in this issue, what we've talked about today, events like this, the kind of information that Bernayne and Lorraine and Chris are circulating amongst them, I'm collecting all that and putting it out on a newsletter. So please just leave me your email address if you're interested. So I'm done.